Hey everyone, this is a piece by Robert V. Daniels. It's titled The Left Opposition as an Alternative to Stalinism. Soviet historians, roaming the wide range of speculation that Glasnost has opened to them, are trying to exorcise the terrible memory of Stalinism by exploring the might have beens, the alternative policies and lines of development that the Soviet Union might have chosen at the critical turning point a decade after the revolution. Articles and conferences, one after another on this period, have been focusing on, quote, alternatives, or, quote, the choice of paths of social development. The preferred subject of sympathetic speculation among Soviet historians is, of course, Nikolai Bukharin, the party's theoretician and personal favorite, and leader of the right opposition that briefly but vainly tried to resist Stalin's revolution from above in 1928 to 29. This emphasis, while understandable as a contrast with the horrors Stalin was to perpetrate, underplays another political movement that fought much longer, with a much more developed sense of the issues, against Stalin and against the autocratic regime that Stalin developed in the 1920s through his control of the Communist Party's bureaucratic apparatus. The left opposition, commonly identified both in the West and in the Soviet Union with Lev Trotsky, was this alternative. Western historians, like Soviet writers during the first years of Glasnost, have often looked on Trotsky and Trotskyism not as an alternative to Stalinism but as the forerunner of Stalinism. In this view, Stalin won in a purely personal struggle for the leadership role. This interpretation overlooks the distinctive sources and premises of the left opposition, as compared with both the Leninist and Stalinist leadership of the Communist Party, and neglects the development of this movement during the first decade of the revolution. Between 1923 and 1927, the left opposition strove to alter the direction of national policy, which it thought ruinous to the goals of the Bolshevik Revolution. Whether these goals could have been realized under the conditions then obtaining in Soviet Russia is, in retrospect, certainly questionable, but one thing is clear. The failure of the left opposition meant the elimination of any political force genuinely attempting to realize the aims of the revolution in the near term. From the demise of the left opposition in 1927 until the repudiation of neo-Stalinism in 1985, the revolutionary mystique served only as a fulcrum of self-justification for regimes and policies that veered widely away from the original mark. The roots of the left opposition go back as early as 1907. A left wing of the Bolshevik faction of the RSDRP took shape initially under the leadership of Alexander Bogdanov, together with such future Soviet figures as Anatoly Lunacharsky. I'm not sure, but I think Anatoly Lunacharsky might also have been part of the Mezryantsy, or the interdistrict group that Trotsky was part of, which was like neither Bolshevik nor Menshevik, but tried to like reunite the two. But I'm not sure. Maxim Gorky, the famous author, Viktor Krazin, Andrei Bubnov, Dmitry Manuilsky, and Mikhail Pokrovsky. I don't know if that's the Pokrovsky who later became the historian. There's a Pokrovsky that became like a historian, but a major Soviet historian, but I'm not sure. The immediate issue was Lenin's decision to abandon the revolutionaries' boycott of the Tsarist Duma. During the war years of 1914 to 1916, a number of émigré Bolsheviks prominent after the revolution, including Bukharin, Grigory Pyatakov, Felix Dzerzhinsky, Grigory Sokolnikov, Alexander Kollontai, Alexander Shliapnikov, and Valerian Osinsky Belensky, indulged in left-wing factionalism. After the February Revolution, the Bolshevik leftists, together with many prominent left-wing Mensheviks who joined the Bolshevik ranks at that point, among them Trotsky, Christian Rakovsky, Karl Radek, and Vladimir Antonov Ovchinko, were the most vocal supporters of Lenin's insurrectionist line. While Lenin's hitherto most loyal lieutenants, Grigory Zinoviev, Lev Kamenev, Alexei Rykov, held back until the October coup. After October, when the Bolsheviks had to contend with ending the war and restoring the economy, the factional positions were reversed. Many leftist leaders, including Bukharin, Radek Osinsky, and Vladimir Smirnov, took the name Left Communists and protested against both the Brest-Litovsk peace and Lenin's resort to bureaucratic organization with bourgeois administrators in the newly socialized economy. The left wing of the Communist Party had a long, continuous history, including a major role in the October Revolution and the initial organization of Soviet power. It was not, as is often simplistically represented, merely the entourage of one disaffected leader. What then distinguished left Bolshevism, if we may use that term, from the line represented by Lenin? It was, to begin with, more exclusively a movement of emigre intellectuals, who were more influenced by Western democratic ideas than were the underground in Russia. Intellectuals who had been in emigration constituted the core of the left opposition of the 1920s. Footnote: see R.V. Daniels, The Conscience of the Revolution, based on the biographies of revolutionary leaders. I have a couple chapters in that book up here, but I didn't finish the book. End footnote. Vyacheslav Molotov explicitly used this fact against the left when they were expelled from the party in 1927. Quote, writing articles and making speeches is by no means sufficient to make one a consistent and enduring revolutionary. End quote. Footnote, see Vyacheslav Molotov's speech at the Central Committee School for District Party Workers, 2nd of October 1926, published in Pravda, 5th of October 1926. End footnote. Ever since Bogdanov's eminence, the left had embraced an almost mystical faith in the proletariat and the proletariat's international solidarity. At the same time, the left was much less willing than Lenin to resort to methods of command and discipline, either in leading the Bolshevik Party before the revolution or in leading the Russian state afterwards. The left was strategically more idealistic and tactically more rash, even, quote, adventurous, than those people, usually from the underground in Russia, whose more practical interest in organization and greater sense of tactical prudence led them to rally around Lenin most of the time. These characteristics explain why it was the left that differed most with Lenin before the revolution, supported Lenin most ardently in 1917, and criticized Lenin most sharply in the months that followed. In short, two different psychologies competed in the party, one more utopian, the other more authoritarian. The events prompting the Bolshevik left to go into opposition in 1923 are well known. The old schism between the left and the stricter Leninists had opened up again in 1920-21 in debates over the future of war communism, the trade unions, and the principles of party discipline. After its defeat at the critical 10th Party Congress, the left saw its antagonists taking control of the party organization while Lenin lay on his deathbed, and resolved to fight them. In the resulting New Course controversy of late 1923, the left was crushed by the party apparatus under Stalin's direction and never really recovered as a political force. Thus the left opposition ceased to be a realistic alternative at all when it had barely begun to make its case. This fact, however, does not diminish the significance of the policy alternatives urged by the left between 1923 and the time of its final defeat in 1927. For if nothing else, the left is important for its recognition of the weakness or evils inherent in the other political alternatives competing for the nation's destiny. Ideologically, the left opposition was distinguished by its genuine, even dogmatic belief in the virtue and mission of the working class. Lenin's dictum, "Chose de lot," I don't know what that means. That, quote, I guess that's into what is to be done. Okay. Lenin's dictum in What is to be Done that, quote, the working class exclusively, by the working class's own effort, is able to develop only trade union consciousness, end quote, was never accepted by the leftist strand in Bolshevism. They were convinced that the October Revolution had created a workers' state, despite the acknowledged weakness of the industrial proletariat in Russia, and its virtual disintegration during the period of war communism. Footnote. See the article by Sheila Fitzpatrick titled The Bolsheviks' Dilemma, Class Culture and Politics in the Early Soviet Years. End footnote. The NEP, with the NEP's concessions to the petite bourgeois instincts of the peasantry and the netmen, was to these people at best a necessary evil, a quote, tactic that they hoped and expected to be short-lived. Commitment to the ideal of the working class, coupled with the recognition of the dire straits in which the proletariat, its ideal, found itself in post-revolutionary Russia, underlay every other facet of the left opposition's beliefs and programs. Given the premises, the conclusions were logical. Fear of the social weight of the peasant masses was realistic, whether or not it was meaningful to call them petite bourgeoisie. To call them petite bourgeois. It was equally realistic to fear concessions by the party leadership that would prolong and deepen the NEP at the expense of the urban workers. It was perhaps more fanciful, though still logical, to look to the international revolution for salvation, and to hang future hopes for a socialist revolution on the success of communist movements abroad, in keeping with Trotsky's theory of permanent revolution. A more questionable line of reasoning underlay the left's advocacy of accelerated industrialization. To question the social base of the self-styled worker state by expanding industry in order to turn more peasants into workers. Quote, in the last analysis, end quote, Trotsky wrote in 1923, the quote, the working class can maintain and strengthen its guiding position not through the apparatus of government, not through the army, but through industry which reproduces the proletariat itself. End quote. Trotsky. Footnote. Something from the Trotsky archive in Russian. The voluntaristic sociological argument called for the communist state to create the communist state's own class undergirding that was supposed in classical Marxism to result from economic development, with the worker state following naturally. All the while, according to the left, bureaucratic trends in the party and state had to be fought in order to maximize the role of, quote, workers' democracy, end quote, and keep the ship of state headed in the socialist direction. Ironically, there was no effective worker support for the left opposition. The party apparatus had better control over worker communists than it did over any other element of the party. Even the utopians of the workers' opposition preferred to support the party leadership after 1923. Active support of the left came primarily from intellectuals and students naturally concentrated in Moscow. Of the issues raised by the left opposition, industrialization was the earliest to crystallize and the one debated most bitterly throughout the NEP years. The social goals of the left required quick industrialization faster than could be accomplished through market forces. Almost all the defects in the social and political order of the new economic of NEP Russia were attributed to the, quote, lag of industry behind the economic development of the country as a whole, end quote, and the consequent, quote, lowering of the specific gravity of the proletariat in the society, end quote, and lowering the political and cultural self-esteem of the proletariat as the ruling class, end quote. Declaration of the 13, July 1926. Trotsky launched the idea of systematic planned economic development as early as 1923 in his, quote, Theses on Industry, prepared for the 12th Party Congress. Quote, only the development of industry creates an unshakable foundation for the proletarian dictatorship, ... All state activity in general must give primary concern to the planned development of state industry, end quote. Trotsky. Theses on Industry. This document is interesting for Trotsky's admonition as it is for his emphasis on planning. Industry and agriculture would have to develop in balance. Industry depended on agriculture, but state industry could not lag behind. lest, quote, private industry, swallow up state industry or suck state industry dry, end quote. Trotsky continued with qualifications still pertinent to today's subsidized and debt-burdened state industry. Quote, only such industry can be victorious which gives more than that industry swallows up, end quote. Planning should be comprehensive but careful in planning's methods. Quote, arbitrary administration by bureaucratic agencies is replaced by economic maneuvering, end quote. In 1924, Trotsky wrote prophetically of, quote, objective limitations, end quote, to the pace of industrialization, quote, the level of peasant economy, the actual development of industry, the availability of working capital, the cultural level of the country, end quote. Trotsky. Therefore, Trotsky concluded, quote, any attempt to leap over these limitations would surely take its own bitter revenge, striking the proletariat at one end and the peasantry at the other, end quote. Trotsky. Trotsky Something in Russian, English translation available in Leon Trotsky, The Challenge of the Left Opposition, 1923 to 1925, edited by Naomi Allen. End footnote. Industrial development continued to be a major focus of polemics between the left and party leadership until the final silencing of the Trotskyists. Evgeny Preobrazhensky argued for the left that industry could not wait for the market mechanisms of consumer demand to stimulate industry's growth, but needed direct injections of capital accumulated from the agricultural sector through the taxing power of the state. Quote, primary socialist accumulation, end quote, he termed it, paraphrasing Marx's notion of, quote, primary capitalist accumulation, end quote. Assuming that agriculture would remain in private hands, Preobrazhensky frankly proposed that agriculture be exploited until the socialist system developed all the socialist system's natural advantages over capitalism. Footnote. Evgeny Preobrazhensky, Novaya Ekonomika. I'm assuming that means new economics. I'm not sure, though. End footnote. When the united opposition of the Trotskyists and Zinovievists was formed in 1926, the left renewed its alarms about the lag in development of state industry and charged vainly in their Declaration of the 13 because the statement could not be published, in parentheses, vainly in their Declaration of the 13 because the statement could not be published, in parentheses, that the industrialization resolution of the 14th Party Congress, the document hailed in Stalin historiography as the beginning of the great industrialization drive, was not being implemented. Nevertheless, the party leadership represented by Bukharin and Rykov was moving toward the kind of systematic planning insisted on by the left. Ironically, the resolution on the first 5-year plan introduced by Rykov at the 15th Congress was adopted simultaneously with the expulsion of the left from the party. The issue of industrialization was inseparable from the question of agriculture and the peasantry. To left and right equally, the peasantry was both a problem and a resource for progress towards socialism. The disagreement was over how to manage the problem and how to exploit the resource. Both sides in the debate assumed that the peasantry was petit bourgeois in its instincts and a threat to the worker state. But both sides perceived the threat differently. The right feared a peasant uprising and advocated concessions to let agriculture prosper, while a long, gradual cultural revolution prepared the peasants for socialism. Lenin had advocated much the same approach in his last articles. Quote, the proletariat after its victory, end quote, Bukharin declared in 1924, quote, must get along with the peasantry, no matter what. And by extension, with peasants who lived under colonialism elsewhere in the world, quote, therefore we must ideologically liquidate Trotskyism, for the question of the worker-peasant bloc is the central question, end quote. Bukharin, or I don't know, I believe that's Bukharin, The footnote doesn't say Bukharin. It says it's just like something in Russian. Oh no, it is is Nikolai Bukharin. Yeah, sorry, it is Nikolai Bukharin. That's from a piece called Theory Permanentnoi Revolucji. And footnote. Um, in contrast, the left feared concessions to kulak capitalism and the influence of petite bourgeois attitudes within the workers' state. In 1925, the Zinovievist P.A. Salutsky had warned that these tendencies could, if not combated, lead to a Soviet Thermidor. Parenthesis, all factions failed to realize that the real Soviet Thermidor had already taken place with the introduction of the NEP, distinguished in the Russian case by the ability of the Revolutionary Party to retain power while retreating from the utopian extremist program of war communism, in parenthesis. According to the left, Thermidorian and petite bourgeois tendencies had to be combated by a pro-worker orientation that would make the peasantry pay. Preobrazhensky wrote that, quote, the state economy cannot do without alienating part of the surplus product of the village and of craft production without deductions from capitalist accumulation for the benefit of socialist accumulation, end quote. Preobrazhensky. A contentious theoretical basis to the intra-party dispute of 1920 was the ongoing question of Soviet Russia's relation to the international revolution. From the time of the October Revolution until Lenin's death, the communists universally assumed that their victory in Russia was an aberration from the Marxian scheme of history, attributable to imperialism and World War I. Their survival as a socialist regime, let alone the implementation of a fully socialist program, required the support of a victorious international socialist revolutionary movement. After he went into opposition, Trotsky repeatedly accused the leadership of failing to exploit opportunities to promote revolution abroad, including the abortive German October of 1923, the mismatched alliance with the British Labour Party, and the communist debacle in China in 1927. Footnote, see especially Lev Trotsky, The Lessons of October, and the Declaration of the 84 from the 25th of May, 1927. End footnote. Trotsky did not, however, publicly set forth the full logic of Trotsky's position on international revolution until the fall of 1924, when Trotsky published Uroki Oktyabria, attacking Zinoviev and Kamenev for their vacillation in 1917. In reply, the party leaders reached back to Trotsky's pre-revolutionary writings to denounce Trotskyism as the heretical antithesis of their newly minted orthodoxy, Leninism. Stalin assumed a major role, belying the view popularized by Trotsky that Stalin was inept in theory. Targeting Trotsky's old theory of permanent revolution, with its implication that socialism in Russia could not withstand the pressure of petite bourgeois peasant influence without support by an international workers' revolution, Stalin adroitly exploited Lenin's writings to contrive his theory of socialism in one country and to condemn Trotsky for, quote, lack of faith in the strength and capabilities of the Russian proletariat, end quote. Stalin. Socialism in one country, in fact, hinged on one line from Lenin, taken out of context and misinterpreted. In 1915, Lenin had written that, quote, Uneven economic and political development is an absolute law of capitalism. Hence, the victory of socialism is possible first in several or even in one capitalist country taken singly. End quote. Stalin quoted the passage, but added his own emendation, quote, even if that country is less developed in the capitalist sense. End quote. Stalin. As Kamenev pointed out, when the issue was finally debated openly in a 1926 party forum, Lenin meant no such thing and had clearly stressed Russia's unreadiness for socialist revolution in other writings of that period. Nevertheless, Stalin imposed his new reading of Lenin through his control of the party disorganization. Nevertheless, Stalin imposed his new reading of Lenin through his control of the party organization and the party press, and thereby established both the precedent and the mechanism for revising the ideas of Marx and Lenin to support Stalin's political purposes. The real significance of socialism in one country is not the theological argument about the socialist essence of the Soviet regime, but Stalin's new method of manipulating Marxist-Leninist doctrine. Neither the left opposition nor the leadership disputed the theoretical desirability of international revolution or the practical desirability of courting diplomatic recognition and alliances with non-socialist forces. While the international issue was the subject of extensive theoretical fireworks, the most significant matter for the fate both of the left opposition and of the Soviet Union was the question of democracy or bureaucracy within the Communist Party. This issue was first articulated forcefully in October 1923, when Trotsky decided that Trotsky could no longer maneuver successfully within the Politburo and sent a confidential letter to the Central Committee condemning the undemocratic trend in the party. Quote, in the fiercest moment of war communism, end quote, Trotsky wrote, quote, the system of appointment within the party did not have 1/10 of the extent that the system of appointment within the party has now, ... The bureaucratization of the party apparatus has developed to unheard of proportions by means of the method of secretarial selection. End quote. Trotsky. English translation in Allen's edited volume, Leon Trotsky, and footnote. This concern was quickly echoed by Trotsky's sympathizers in the Declaration of the 46, parenthesis, also confidential, a major opposition mistake, end parenthesis. This is a very important thing. If you listen to the work, which will probably be up soon, around the same time as this, maybe before, maybe later, but I just put it up, so it's already up. John Eric Merritt's essay on the left opposition in the 1920s, he says basically the same thing, and also Alexei Gusev, or Alexei Gusev, I'm not sure how you say his name, says the same thing, that the left opposition systematically did not appeal directly to the party masses, to the direct producers in the Soviet Union, neither peasant nor worker, in any kind of way that stepped beyond the confines of party precedent, right? So they did not go directly to the workers, right? They stayed completely within the confines of the party. And the anarchist Ian McKay argued that by workers' democracy, Trotsky, at least in the 1920s, meant democracy within the Bolshevik Party is what workers' democracy meant for the left opposition. Granted, the left opposition had different moments of it, but the mainstream of it certainly was not about stirring up working class insubordination to the Bolshevik Party. Anyway, much less the peasantry. This concern was quickly echoed by Trotsky's sympathizers in the Declaration of the 46, parenthesis, also confidential, a major opposition mistake, end parenthesis. Quote, we observe a more and more progressive division of the party, no longer concealed by anyone, into the secretarial hierarchy and the, quote, laymen, into the professional party functionaries selected from above, bracket, that is, by Stalin, end bracket, and the simple party masses who do not participate in its group life, end quote. Declaration of the 46. In its 1926 platform, the United Opposition denounced the, quote, prevailing course, under which people talk only on top, while below they think, and think to themselves under cover, ... The party mass always hears only the speech of the party command, ... No resolutions anywhere are ever adopted otherwise than, quote, unanimously, end quote. End quote. Declaration of the 13. At first, by implication, but later more openly, the left made Stalin's record in bureaucratizing the party a major point of debate. The first explicit warnings about the danger of Stalin's personal accumulation of power seemed to have been the work of the Zinovievists, once Stalin had turned against them in 1925. Ironically, Zinoviev had defended Stalin at the 13th Party Congress and saved Stalin from the ouster urged in Lenin's testament. At the 14th Party Congress, Zinoviev delivered a minority report, a gesture of divisiveness not seen since the 17th Party Congress at the time of Brest-Litovsk, and spoke of, quote, difficulty in the, quote, creation of a collective leadership for our party after the death of Vladimir Ilyich, end quote. Zinoviev. Kamenev addressed the same gathering more bluntly, quote, we are against creating a theory of the Vajda, which is, what does Vajda mean? I think that means decree. Wait, Vajda might be leader. God damn it. God, I've looked this word up a million times. Yeah, the leader. Kamenev addressed the same gathering more bluntly, quote, we are creating a theory against creating a theory of the, quote, Vajda, again, leader. We are against establishing a, quote, Vajda. We are against the Secretariat, which has in practice combined both policy and organization, standing over the political organ, end quote. Even more directly against the din of loud heckling by the pro-Stalin majority. Quote, I have arrived at this conviction, the conviction, that Comrade Stalin cannot fulfill the role of unifier of the Bolshevik staff, end quote. Lev Kamenev. This Congress was, of course, the last one to exhibit such open discord until the 1980s. After the formation of the United Opposition in 1926, Trotsky took up the anti-Stalin theme himself. He charged that, quote, the further development of the bureaucratic regime leads fatally to individual rule, end quote, and referred explicitly to the warning about Stalin in Lenin's, quote, testament. By mid-1927, Trotsky, Zinoviev, and Kamenev were alleging, quote, the most extreme usurpation of the supreme rights of the party, end quote. And Trotsky himself warned that, quote, the personal misfortune of Stalin, which is more and more becoming the misfortune of the party, consists of a vast discrepancy between Stalin's intellectual resources and the power which the party and state apparatus is concentrated in Stalin's hands, end quote. Trotsky. Theses for the 15th Party Conference, 19th of September 1926. End footnote. Facing expulsion from the Central Committee in October 1927, Trotsky again recalled Lenin's, quote, testament and asserted that, quote, the rudeness and disloyalty of which Lenin wrote are no longer mere personal characteristics. They have become the character of the ruling faction, ... The fundamental character of our present leadership is itself... The fundamental character of our present leadership is its belief in the omnipotence of methods of violence, even in dealing with its own party, end quote. Trotsky. Speech to the Central Committee, 23rd of October, 1927. The concerns of the left opposition about the demise of democratic processes within the party were highlighted by the frantic response of the party leadership under Stalin and Bukharin. Quote, unity, quote, iron discipline, and quote, ideological purity were touted as the cardinal political virtues, and the left opposition was accused not only of factionalism but of anti-Leninist ideological heresy. Quote, we Leninists, Bukharin said, quote, have regarded the unity and coherence of our party as the first prerequisite for the maintenance and former establishment of the proletarian dictatorship. We Leninists have always imagined that the proletarian dictatorship can only be secure in our country if our party plays its role properly, and when this party is in the first place the sole party in our country. That is, when the legal existence of other parties is made impossible. When the legal existence of other parties is made impossible. And in the second place, the party is unitary in the party's structure. That is, represents a structure excluding any independent and autonomous groups, factions, organized currents, etc. End quote. Nikolai Bukharin. Report to the Leningrad Party Organization, 28th of July, 1926. Pravda, 3rd of August, 1926. Stalin, living up to Stalin's reputation for rudeness, spoke contemptuously of, quote, the opposition, hobbling behind the party like a decrepit old man, with rheumatism in his legs, pains in the side, and pains in the head, the opposition sowing pessimism and poisoning the atmosphere, with the opposition's whining, to the effect that nothing will come of our efforts to construct socialism in the USSR, end quote. Stalin. At the 15th Party Congress, Stalin pronounced final judgment, quote, the opposition utterly breaks away from the Leninist principle of organization and takes the path of organizing a second party, the path of organizing a new international, ... The opposition has slipped into Menshevism, end quote. Stalin, concluding remarks at the 7th plenum of the ECCI, Pravda, 19th of December, 1926. Attacks upon the left opposition illustrate the development of a distinctly authoritarian psychology within the leading cadres of the party. Unable to tolerate criticism of their own political legacy, the Stalin-Bukharin leadership encouraged the most primitive and abusive attacks on dissenters in the party and effectively stamped out all free opinion and political independence outside the bureaucratic chain of command. A perverse form of Marxian reasoning was advanced to justify the suppression of political pluralism. Political differences were the expression of class differences, and, since the party and the party's general line by definition represented the proletariat, any deviation was automatically anti-proletarian, pro-bourgeois, and hence inadmissible. No one, not even the opposition, asked why the proletariat, like the bourgeoisie in a parliamentary system, could not be represented by two or more parties. On the contrary, allowing anyone to question the leadership's proletarian rectitude, Bukharin warned, was, quote, bound to lead sooner or later to the idea of the overthrow of the Soviet power. It can lead nowhere else, end quote. Nikolai Bukharin, report to the Leningrad Party Organization, Pravda, 3rd of August, 1926. Bukharin, for all his recent popularity as a new Soviet cult figure, cannot be exonerated of Bukharin's role in perfecting the principle and practice of the monolithic party, of which Bukharin was shortly to become a victim himself. Considering its compelling issues and arguments, well grounded both in Marxist theory and in the assessment of contemporary reality, why did the left opposition fail so completely? A variety of reasons contributed to the left opposition's defeat. The left was not united, and the left's leaders were poor tacticians. After the decisive 1923 confrontation, the left could never effectively break through the barriers of the apparatus to reach party rank and file. That's what Merritt basically says. And the non-party populace was left in the dark by the left's usually secret maneuvers. What Merritt says. Trotsky, although he had a brilliant record as a voice of revolution and as a wartime commander, had no gift for political intrigue or coalition building. Trotsky's timing was invariably wrong. Trotsky failed to move when Trotsky should. Trotsky risked confrontations when Trotsky was vulnerable, and Trotsky confused his supporters by retreats and concessions to the party leadership. Recent published materials of the Central Committee indicate that Trotsky was inhibited from assuming the top leadership by fear that his Jewish origin would be used by enemies of the Soviet regime. Footnote. Concluding remarks by Trotsky at the joint plenum of the Central Committee and the Central Control Commission, 26th of October, 1923. End footnote. Stalin, on the other hand, had a shrewd tactical sense, an ability to manipulate issues and ideas cleverly, and a clear sense of power based on the party apparatus that Stalin was building up into the decisive instrument of rule. The campaign of the left opposition against the party leadership was paralyzed by its own ambivalence about the doctrine of party unity. Professing to conform to the 1921 ban on factions and platforms, the opposition leaders declared in October 1926, for example, quote, "We categorically reject the theory and practice of freedom of factions and groupings, realizing that such a theory and practice contradict the foundations of Leninism and decisions of the party," end quote. And there you go. Let's repeat that again. Professing to conform to the 1921 ban on factions and platforms, the opposition declared in October 1926, for example, quote, "We categorically reject the theory and practice of freedom of factions and groupings, realizing that such a theory and practice contradict the foundations of Leninism and decisions of the party," end quote. Rather than defend the principle of pluralism of opinions within the party, the opposition merely tried to claim that its own line was the truly correct Leninist one. Only after years of exile did Trotsky concede the error of the one-party, single-truth philosophy. Quote, "It is necessary," Trotsky said in 1937, quote, "to prepare the arena for two parties, ... maybe three or four, is necessary to smash away the dictatorship of Stalin, ... If this new political upheaval is successful, the masses with these experiences will never permit the dictatorship of one party, of one bureaucracy," end quote. Lev Trotsky, Statement to the Preliminary Commission of Inquiry, John Dewey, Chairman, in The Case of Leon Trotsky, Report of Hearings on the Charges Made Against Him in the Moscow Trials. End footnote. Would Trotsky and the left opposition necessarily have acted the same way as the Stalinists did if they prevailed in the struggle for power? The case for Trotsky as a proto-Stalinist rests mainly on Trotsky's record during war communism, including his advocacy of the militarization of labor. But the left opposition of the 1920s cannot be judged on the basis of Trotsky's position during war communism, any more than Lenin or Bukharin should be understood only for their positions in that period. All three leaders changed in different ways in response to the failure of war communism and the new conditions of the NEP. Trotsky and his supporters reverted to the more genuinely democratic views that they held before 1917. To suggest that Stalin's victory over Trotsky made no difference is to deny the former's unique personal influence and Stalin's arbitrary and perhaps paranoid decisions that put Stalin's stamp on the character of the Soviet regime. Footnote, one Soviet specialist on the subject suggested to me in private conversation in April 1990, quote, "Stalin n'est pas paranoïque, a bandit." I guess a paranoid bandit. I don't know if that's what that translates as. I have no idea. Many of the most distinctive features of Stalin's rule, his campaign against bourgeois experts beginning with the Shakti trials, Stalin's contemptuous anti-intellectualism and dogmatization of Marxism, the purges, run totally counter to Trotsky's thought. Trotsky condemned wholesale collectivization and, quote, planomania, end quote, and coined the now familiar term market socialism as a mechanism to make the economic plan self-correcting. Footnote. See Richard B. Day's Leon Trotsky and the Politics of Economic Isolation. End footnote. I think that's the generally Richard B. Day's thesis that Trotsky wasn't a super industrializer, that he was some kind of market socialist. But then people would dispute that. Although the fact that Trotsky did believe at least in the importance of money and commodity production, pretty well into the what we call as a crucial part of the developing of in a socialist direction in the confines of what he called the Soviet worker state. Anyway, despite the affinity of some of Stalin's methods with Trotsky's ideas of militarizing the economy during war communism, the latter now rejected such policies as concession to backwardness in the isolated socialist state. An initial similarity between Stalin's economic program and that of the opposition was clearly apparent to many of the Trotskyists, who accordingly agreed to, quote, capitulate, and to collaborate with the General Secretary. Preobrazhensky, for instance, declared in April 1929, quote, the policy of the party did not deviate to the right after the 15th Congress, as the opposition described it, ... but on the contrary, in certain substantive points, the policy of the party has seriously moved ahead on the correct path, end quote, which constituted in Preobrazhensky's mind, quote, a great moral victory for the views of the opposition, end quote. Preobrazhensky. And it's important to note that Preobrazhensky was by no means a minority figure in the left opposition. That letter that was mentioned earlier, that Trotsky, that was kind of released in private, or not clandestinely, what the hell's the word? Non-publicly, I guess, is the easiest way to say it. The letter that was the Declaration of the 46 that Trotsky didn't sign, but was a central document of the left opposition, I believe was spearheaded by Preobrazhensky. And it's not, and John Eric Merritt argues that almost all the, or a very, very strong amount of Trotskyists that existed in the Soviet Union did capitulate to Stalinism in the late 1920s. And he argues that it's not just a matter of force or anything of that sort, but where they genuinely did view Stalin's new left zigzag as appropriate. They were more cautious about whether he would stick to his guns. Now, I think there was some comments by different former left oppositionists to the effect of certain aspects of industrialization, of Stalinist industrialization, but I don't think they were fundamental criticisms. Also, what else was I going to say? I had a thought there. So Merritt basically believes that people like Preobrazhensky actually did find something appetizing in Stalin's program, even though I think Stalin went beyond the quotas that were initially advocated for by the left opposition, and did it in a very brutal manner. But it's hard to imagine how some of these policies could not be done in a brutal manner if power was restricted to one party, and the peasants who would have to participate in this participate in this industrialization who ostensibly all had, pro-capitalist tendencies, how they could possibly participate effectively or in any of these plans in a way that was desirable for their own interest as humans and as peasants. Um, it's hard to imagine how the kind of collectivization and industrialization that took place in the Soviet Union in the 1920s and 1930s could not have been done without uh, extreme anti-democratic violence. Anyway, moving on. In any case, speculation about how Trotsky and his supporters might have acted if they had stepped into the shoes of Stalinists is not very fruitful. The Stalinist is not very fruitful. A review of the actual stand that the left took as a critical alternative to the Stalin-Bukharin line until 1927 is more important. The present analysis has endeavored to show that the left gave industrialization a much higher priority than did the Bukharinists. Though they never contemplated the crash methods of planning or the violent uprooting of the peasantry undertaken by Stalin. On the international plane, the practical differences between the camps have been exaggerated. No matter how Trotsky felt about the difficulties for Russian socialism in the absence of world revolution, Trotsky was in reality no more prepared than Stalin or Bukharin to risk war or the loss of foreign trade opportunities. The position of the left opposition most clearly contrasts to the Stalinist system in regard to party democratization and bureaucratization. On this issue, which the opposition raised and reiterated throughout its struggle with the Stalin-Bukharin leadership, the left anticipated and explicitly warned of the most serious evils of the Stalin era. They recognized Stalin's character as that of an unprincipled power grabber and saw the danger inherent in the concentration of power in the party apparatus under his direction. They protested the new doctrine of unanimity in political opinion, although they finally fell victim to it. The record of the left opposition is of major importance today in the light of the political and historical issues raised by perestroika and trying to understand the political and social circumstances that made Stalinism possible. Even if the opposition's criticisms are futile, they document the totalitarian trend in Soviet politics. The warnings of the left, although usually unpublished, show that in the mid-1920s, the dictatorship of Stalin and the dangerous consequences of his rule could be foreseen. While the left opposition may not have fully understood the social circumstances contributing to Stalinism, they clearly recognized the bureaucratic trend in Soviet political life that Stalin exploited. For all these reasons, the left critique of the party leadership during the 1920s still deserves study and credit as a major benchmark in understanding Stalinism. That's the end of the piece. Thanks for listening.